Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off because today I'll be sharing a Kickstarter preview of 2 Minutes to Midnight from Plague Island Games. And we'll get stuck in right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be sharing a preview of 2 Minutes to Midnight. But first, I do want to mention that I should have had this preview video done quite a while ago. But if you do follow the Gaming Gang website or the channel, then you probably already know that I underwent triple bypass surgery less than 3 weeks ago. So that kind of squashed my plans of getting the preview video done prior to this launching on Kickstarter. Because yes, 2 Minutes to Midnight is already on Kickstarter. It is fully funded. And I do want to make sure that I get a preview video and share what I think of the game with you as well. I have to point out, it's probably going to be a bit quicker video than usual. My voice is really weak. It's going to take some time for me to get my vocal strength back, I guess. But we're going to dive in. I'm going to share what I think of 2 Minutes to Midnight from Plague Island Games. It's designed by Stuart Tong. It is for 1 or 2 players, ages 14 and up. Plays in 2 to 6 hours, depending on the scenario that you choose. And as I mentioned, this is already fully funded on Kickstarter. I think last I looked, I think it's like 500 or 600% funded. And once this video hits, you'll still have about 10 days to back this project. So let's swing on over to the other camera because this is kind of the main game board for 2 Minutes to Midnight. There's another board as well. It's kind of a technology board. I will share that a little bit later. I'm not going to pop that out just yet because I don't want to mess up how I've got this set up. I have this set up essentially for the introductory scenario for 2 Minutes to Midnight. There are 4 scenarios all in all. One of them's an introductory scenario, so it's relatively short. It's there to kind of give you an idea how this game actually does play. So a few things I'm going to point out. Number one, I am not going to dive into the nitty-gritty about everything regarding this design. Essentially, I know there are other Kickstarter previews already out there. Probably going to go through like all the nuts and bolts. What I am going to talk about is what I think of the game, who I think this game is for, what this game is and what this game is not, because I'm sure some folks just taking a look at 2 Minutes to Midnight are already going to get the impression that this is simply a knockoff of Twilight Struggle from GMT Games, and that is absolutely not the case. Granted, the game board, especially the actual nations here, does look similar to Twilight Struggle, and because the topic is the Cold War, those are pretty much the two things that 2 Minutes to Midnight and Twilight Struggle have in common. Similar looking boards, and they both tackle the Cold War. I'll talk a little bit about the rules. I'll share the rule book as well. The rule book is pretty well done. I got to admit, I think it does need another pass through just to tighten things up a bit. It's not as intuitive as I would have liked, although I was able to figure out how to play the game through both the rule book as well as the player handouts, which are very, very handy. Also, this is not a review because this is a prototype. Even though this is a really nicely put together prototype, this is still not the finished product. So this is not a review, but like I said, I'm going to share my thoughts, what I think about this game as well. So let's dive into the game board itself, this main board. So first off, we have this section here. This is for the United States of America player. Over here, we've got for the Soviet player, and you'll see that these are completely different. These are not similar at all. So first off, for the U.S. player, we've got the national debt because the United States can actually borrow money against itself. So it is possible for the U.S. player to raise the national debt. That can cause unrest in the United States, which actually hamstrings the U.S. as well as the USSR, which we already see they've got 1 unit of unrest right here already. But once you hit 3 unrest in your main country, then you have to use your actions to invest in your country to get rid of the unrest. People might think because this game has decks of cards that this is a card-driven game. It is not. This is a seeded deck. There are essentially action cards for the U.S. as well as the Soviets in this deck here, as well as a bunch of events. And we have a variety of decks that we will use depending on what turn of the game it happens to be. This next section here is the president. We will have elections in the United States. And every time there is a presidential election, you're going to roll 2 6-sided dice, and you are going to basically get that president's agenda. It's going to tell you what's going on. It could be civil rights, could be the economy, could be trade. We have a victory progress bar here, which we also have for the Soviets. You'll notice this goes to 6. This one only goes to 4. What happens is when you get countries under your influence and they have basically a value, an industrial value, an economic value, you're going to take that value, you're going to add it to your track. And once you hit the end of the track, for an example here, if I get to 6 as a U.S. player, I'm going to take a star token, which is kind of a victory point token. And then I'm going to reset down to 0. For some reason, if something cost me points, then I would actually mark those back off and have to hand over my star token that I've got. The Soviets, they have a hammer and sickle. So essentially what will happen is after the end of the 4th turn, if either player has 3 more victory tokens than their opponent, the game ends and they are the victor. It is pretty much a major victory. If after 9 turns and nobody has gotten that 3 more than the other player, whoever has the most victory tokens will be declared the winner. So essentially the victory points are pretty easy. It's pretty easy to tell who's won, even if it's, automatic victory at the end of a turn or at the end of the game itself. What I'm going to do here is, since I'm done talking about this, I'm actually going to pop up here in picture-in-picture, howdy gang, as I talk about 2 minutes to midnight. So taking a look at the Soviets, we have oil production and oil price. Of course, a lot of people look at Russia as a gas station with an army. It's kind of one way people do look at that country. And of course, the Soviet Union was like that as well. So oil plays a big role for the Soviets. There's a 5-year plan. Now, it could be industry, it could be farming, it could be military. So we are going to have that change from time to time. We have tech theft, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting aspect of the game because the United States tends to do a lot of research. And they have advancements in technology. And the Soviets, they tended to be behind the ball, so they would have to steal that technology utilizing spies. So that's something that takes place as well. So we do have the victory track here. So once again, When the Soviets hit 4, they get a hammer and sickle. So it's a bit of a balance aspect of the game, because most people will be sitting there going, wait a second, the U.S. has to get 6 points for their victory token and Soviets only need to get 4. It balances out, don't worry. We also have Soviet leadership. So we've got Stalin in charge to begin the game. And once he passes on to the great beyond, then things loosen up a little bit for the Soviet player as well. We have freedoms and reforms that are going to be on the table as well. We have Western trade, once again, not something that Stalin was interested in, but once he's out of the picture, a little easier for the Soviets to engage in some trade with the West. And for both of our sides, we do have our force pools. So at the beginning, the U.S. has a lot of bombers. They have 1 nuke unit, and they've got 2 armies, as well as spies. And the Soviets have an army and 6 spies they can utilize. Taking a look at the game board itself. So you'll notice we've got cubes. These cubes represent influence for the 2 factions. You also see a disc. So essentially, we'll use Yugoslavia and Albania as an example. If there's 1 cube, that means that that country is being influenced by that superpower. If you have 2 cubes, you can replace the 2 cubes with this cylinder, or disc, I should say. And that disc indicates that that region is firmly in the pocket of that superpower. Now, it is possible for you to have 3 influence in a location. What that essentially does is that's just banking against your opponent trying to take influence out of that country. Influences with a die roll. There are a lot of die rolls in this game. This game can be very swingy. It can be very luck dependent as well. It's important for you to know that. It's also important that the players have an idea of the various different events that are going to be taking place, to have kind of get a feel for it, because it is extremely possible for one player to be investing into a certain area of the game map, and then suddenly an event card comes up and that's it. I mean, they're basically taken out of action in that location. So it's important for the players to get a look at the event cards and have a clue before they start playing the game. So we have some industrial wealth, industrial value, and because this is the end of the Second World War, this actually is beginning in 1946, much of Europe's been devastated. So we have these little markers here basically blocking off the industrial capacities of these regions. And by making investments into these areas, we can actually remove these and start opening up economic value for these different areas, because that will play a big factor in who wins the game. Is the industrial value, the economic value of the countries that are aligned with your superpower. We also have tech theft. So I was talking about that over here. So one of my actions, I could actually utilize a spy and steal technology from the U.S. and cash that in. We have, here we see that the Soviets actually do have military forces in these 2 locations that are in the midst of civil wars. So civil wars are important as well. Civil wars are a way for your superpower to take over another region outside of just a coup. Because there are coups and there are civil wars as well. So here we see, as an example, we've got Greece. Greece is in the midst of a civil war. But the United States has actually placed investment into Greece. So what the investment will also help do is it will actually give bonuses to the die rolls for that civil war that's taking place in Greece. You can have more than one Civil War token as well. So, as an example here, there could be multiple Civil War tokens in there, and essentially what's going on is during the game period, during the resolution of civil wars, which is all based on when the cards come out of this deck, this is actually going to help the Soviet player pretty much win the Civil War. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it will help because they've got an army there, just like this investment will help with the United States as far as their Civil War as well. We do have areas where we have occupying forces. So these are influenced by the United States, and there are occupying forces there as well. So these are allied forces, obviously enough, in East Germany, even though it's the same colored token, that's indicating that would be Soviet forces occupying that region as well. So what happens with this game? Basically, you're going to be using decks of cards based on what turn it is. So this is the first turn. This is a seeded deck. So this deck is going to have events, and it's also going to have basically money cards for each of the superpowers, which in essence means they get to perform an action. Now, before we jump into that, do you want to kind of share the rule book real quick? The rule book's pretty well done. Certainly does not look like a prototype rule book by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a little verbose where it didn't need to be, and also, as I mentioned previously, it could go through one more pass through with an editor because it's not as intuitive as I would have liked. There are a lot of examples as well, but some of the information is you kind of jump around a little bit to get it as well. Also should point out that this game is a solitaire game also. You don't have to have two players, and there is a bot available as both the United States and the Soviets. So that's very cool as well. You can play either side. You can also hot seat it if you want. You don't necessarily have to use the bot to play if you don't want to. There are solo cards as well. Kind of give you an idea. The player age sheet. So this is the first one. And this is the second one. So altogether, there's 4. So it walks you through everything. And we'll actually get a little deeper into this in just a moment. I do want to show you some of the other stuff that's in the game here. One thing I thought was kind of cool is there is also an additional Soviet player overlay for this facing the other way. So if you're sitting on opposite sides of the table from each other, you could have the U.S. player that faces them, and you just put the overlay on that facing the Soviet player. Also, if you're playing solitaire, bingo, they're both facing you right here. Have to mention when you're first learning how to play the game, and there is a lot going on with this game, it's probably a good idea for both players to start off their first few games sitting next to each other, because there's a good amount of information that has to be processed on this board, and it's much easier if it's actually facing you. So we've got some scenario cards. I'm just grabbing some of this stuff here. Here's that Soviet sheet that I was talking about. Just pop it like that. So you'd be facing the other player. Very cool, like that. There is a lot of stuff in this game too, so just so you know. So we've got our introductory scenario. This is what I've got set up here. Once again, as I mentioned, this starts in 1946. And this is to give you an idea of what's going on in the game. We also have the Soviet steamroller. We have a new era. So a new era, this starts in 1956. So, of course, this is a bit shorter than Soviet Steamroller. The Soviet Steamroller is essentially the full game, all 9 turns. And then we have the Eagle and the Bear. 1966 is the starting point there. All right, you know what? Before we dive into the decks of cards and things like that, let me show you this technology board, which is pretty cool. So here we've got our technology research, and the research actually, the different tracks that we have, this is kind of a tech tree, will have things to do with each other. So as an example, nukes and space do actually have a lot to do with each other. So if you're not investing in the space race, well, then you're probably not going to be developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. So here we have our turn marker. This is where we're gonna show what turn we are on, as well as the funding that's available to each of the factions. We've got tech theft, we've got computers, we've got bunkers, we've got strategic weapons, we have a strategic outlook. So this is a bit of a seesaw here. So we've got our nuclear balance, conventional balance, naval balance, and intel assessment. And we will mark these with the little bingo chips here, just like we do with our player faction boards as well. All right, so we're going to zoom in a little bit, and I am going to show off some of the cards and talk about kind of essentially how the game plays. So let's pop on in. There we go. All right. So you're not going to have a hand of cards. You're going to basically flip a card, and you're going to go through the deck, and that will be your turn. So let's see what we got. Okay, so first off, we have USA money. So essentially what that allows us to do is the U.S. player is going to get an opportunity to perform an action. Well, what are those actions? I'm glad you asked, because they're right here on the player aid. So you can make 2 influence rolls. So you can attempt to add influence into a country you already have influence in, or you can attempt to influence an adjacent country to a country that you have a disc in, that is firmly in your corner. You can make one influence roll and place 1 investment, or you can place 2 investments, or you can place 3 investments if the value of the country is 0 or 1, say like Austria would be, or Greece, or Israel. You can place a spy and either make an influence roll or place an investment. You can place 2 spies. So if you remember, I'm just going to move this just for the heck of it. Let's say we had that in Italy, right? Let's say it's a Soviet player's turn. I can move a spy here. So now that I have a spy there, that's going to allow me to cash in that tech theft when it's my action again. So you can research technology. You can build a military unit or place an army in a civil war. You can resolve an aggression. The Soviets can occupy an aligned communist country after a coup, I should say, is rolled for. Or you can remove an occupied marker and place 1 investment. So shows us the different spy actions that we have available to us. We can suppress unrest, that's the Soviets. We can steal technology. The U.S. can secure a secret or remove a trade item. We can place unrest. This is an unrest marker. And unrest will lead to coups, depending on the sort of country it is. If it's a democracy, you need 3. If it's an authoritarian state, like say here, these are neither communist or democracies. You only need 2 unrest to call for a coup. And once again, it's going to tell you, here we go, moving right along to this. Tells you how, okay, so how do we resolve a coup? It's all right here. How do we resolve a civil war? All right here. Talking about aggressions. This is essentially, aggressions are much stronger forays by one country into another country. Once again, as I mentioned, you are not going to see the U.S. and Soviet Union engage in a nuclear war. It's not going to happen because of mutual assured destruction. But you can have brush wars break out and become kind of bigger wars than just brush wars. Then we get talking about, okay, so how do we end our turn? So all that information that we need to play the game is essentially on our 2 player aid sheets. All right, so let's say as an example, the U.S., I would have to dig through and grab a bunch of stuff. Let's say, all right, we'll do it easy. See, there's a lot of counters and stuff in this game, too, that I just don't happen to have out. Let's say this. Let's say the U.S., for their action, is going to, let me bring my sheet back out again. They decide they are going to, let's do this instead. They're going to place an army in Greece during that civil war because this is going to, the investment's going to give them an advantage in the civil war, and the army will give them an advantage in the civil war. So you'll notice on the cards, it's going to say cycle or it's going to say remove. Might say, what's the other one? I think it says otherwise or something like that. So essentially, this is going to, if it says cycle, it goes into your discard. It's just going to go into a discard. So that is USA money. So that basically meant the US player got to take an action, and their action, they decided they were going to place the army there. On to the next card. Civil War. So this is the first of the Civil War cards. You need to have 2 Civil War cards out, and then you will resolve any civil wars that are taking place. So here it says roll a die. So you can have, what I recommend you do with 2 players is you switch off rolling dice for the events. So just kind of keep track whose turn it is for the event. So that way it's not just one player always rolling for the events. So it says roll a die. We're going to roll a die. All right. So 3 to 4, right? We got a 4. Both sides may add 1 Civil War marker to any civil war, and the Soviets would go first. So what the Soviets would probably look to do is they would probably look to add to the civil war that's going on in Greece. Whereas the U.S. player, now it's off screen right now, it's back up. We have Estonia as well as the Ukraine are both in the midst of a civil war. The U.S. player would probably put it there. Because what will happen in the civil war is, so as an example here, the U.S. player is considered the government because they have some units in here. So usually it's whoever has influence in a country that there's a civil war taking place is considered to be the government. So if the government wins, then the superpower who has essentially the influence or factors in here is going to win, and they're going to have control of the country or influence in that country. Whereas if the rebels win, then it's the opponent. So it is possible for the U.S. player to roll bad dice and have this civil war continue to rage on or end, but the rebels take over Greece. So once again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of luck going on, a lot of dice rolling in this game. So let's look at a few more events here, a few more cards. All right, so we got Soviet money. All right, so Soviet money here. I would probably look to maybe do some investment here. So as an action, once again, taking a look to see what do the Soviets have available to them, I want to say they could place some investments, and just for that, I'm not going to dig around for the investments. They would maybe put investments like, say, into East Germany to try to get rid of some of these actions that are up here. I'll pull this down a little bit, get a better look. Because East Germany has a lot of industrial value to it. Probably be looking at something like that. We have reparations here as well. So that's kind of what the Soviets would probably look to do some investments of some sort. Or maybe, send a spy who was actually up in the UK, because I think it's supposed to be the Cambridge 5 at the end of the war, and tried to do some tech thievery. All right, so here, we'll move on to another event card, just kind of give you an idea. So, war reparations. Once again, you're rolling a die. See, it was a Soviet player got to roll it. A 2. So, they would just cycle this card. So, nothing happens from this event. It just goes into the discard pile. Like so. So, there's a section for our Civil War cards, too, at the bottom of the board for us to keep track. So once we get the second Civil War card is when we would resolve that. Popular unrest. So that says the U.S. player. 5. Both sides must place one unrest in any authoritarian country. Then both sides must place one unrest in any occupied country. No. So as you can see, there's a lot going on the players do not have control over. It's all up to dice rolls. So one aspect of the game that really does come into play is balancing a lot of different things. You can't focus on one specific aspect of this game at the expense of other things going on in this game. You really have to kind of take a broad approach to what's going on in the game. So influencing countries, creating unrest in your opponent's countries, technology, investing in technology, investing in spies, investing in new units, things like that. We have all these different military units that will eventually come into play that allow for certain aspects. So, like, for an example, nukes. Nukes are going to keep other countries from attempting to do anything here because of the nuclear weapons, the mutually assured destruction. We have bombers, we've got armies, we've got subs, we got ICBMs, we've got a lot of different things going on in the game as far as various different military units for you to utilize. What you're going to continue doing is, as I mentioned before, you're going to just go through the various different actions. And I'm going to give you an example here. Now, this is the introductory scenario. So the U.S. and the Soviets have both had one of their money cards removed from this deck. But I want to give you an idea of how many events are actually taking place. And each deck is not the same number of cards. Some decks are larger than other decks, depending on the turn, and whatever cards you happen to have that are in your discard pile get added to your next deck. So there is some carryover, especially if events have not triggered. But I want to give you an example here. So that would have been the second U.S. action. Then we have Israeli independence, research, the Red Army, Stalin. And as you see, all of these, roll for Stalin's death. All of these cards have variety of different outcomes based on the die roll. Once again, kind of swingy. All right, so there we got Tito with Yugoslavia. There would be a Soviet action, Soviet famine, USA money, Berlin blockade, spy agencies. There's our second Civil War. So we would roll a die again, follow these instructions, and then we will resolve the Civil War. So what happens basically here is the U.S. player would get to roll dice against the Civil War marker. And once again, we will jump into here. And how do you resolve it? So you're going to roll 2 dice, and you get +1 for every friendly investment. And once you did that, once you roll, you're going to get rid of these investments. You get a +1 and 1 die per friendly army. And what you're looking to do is you're looking to get a 6. You're looking to get a 6, and it could be a modified 6. And for each 6 you roll, it'll allow you to get rid of one of these Civil War markers. Easy peasy. Like I said, there's a lot of little things going on, but the rules themselves are not difficult to figure out. It's just there are a lot of little mechanisms built upon other mechanisms in this game. All right, so let's finish out this deck here. So then we've got more unrest for authoritarian governments, Nazi spies, another USA action, paperclip, Navy arms race, McCarthy. So you'll see there's like a color code to kind of give you an idea of what this affects. Popular unrest and Soviet money. So as you see, in this turn, each of the superpowers would have had 4 actions. They would have 4 actions they could utilize in the entire turn. Everything else is actions. Now, there's ways to get more money cards and different kinds of money cards that go in here to increase the number of actions that you're going to get in a turn. Once again, I find that pretty interesting as well. So what you're going to continue on, as I mentioned before, you're going to get your victory points. You're going to have your little victory progress. For every 6 points for the U.S., you get a star victory token. For every 4 for the USSR, they get a hammer and sickle victory token. If at the end of 4 turns, the one player has 3 tokens more than the other player, then that is a major victory. Game ends. If you finish up all 9 turns, whoever has the most victory tokens is the winner. And that, in essence, I know there's a lot of little things still cooking under the hood here that I have not gone into, but in essence, that's how you play 2 minutes to midnight. Let me swing on over to the other camera. I'll give you my final thoughts here and let you know. Actually, I've got stuff moved all over the place. There we go. It's like trying to get to my little my keyboard to move to the next scene. It was buried under stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff packed into 2 minutes to midnight. Funny enough, and once again, I mentioned that we were looking at a prototype. The box that the game came in was so full of stuff, it could not close. It did not close flush. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right. So what do I think of 2 minutes to midnight? Keeping in mind, this is a prototype. It's not really a review. But I will tell you what I think. I think this is an excellent game. I think it is very, very cool. I got to admit, I have not played it with 2 players. I have played it solitaire, and I have hot-seated it as well, which I usually do not do. But because I did not have an opportunity to play with 2 players. I did Hot Seat a couple of games. I like the fact that there are a lot of events in this game. There's a lot of different stuff going on. I think it's kind of cool the way the money cards come out. It's almost like a chit pull for your actions. It's very possible for one of the superpowers to get a couple of actions in a row, and the other players is waiting. I mean, that does happen. I pointed out there's a lot of luck involved. This can be a very swingy game. So this is also a game that you have to be kind of light on your feet and be able to react pretty quickly to certain events, because it is very possible for an event to trigger and create kind of a domino effect with other things going on in the game as well. It is very possible for you to have a grand strategy get blown up simply because of an event taking place. It happens. It's one of the reasons why I mentioned it's probably important for each of the players to have a look through the event cards in the game before you actually sit down and play your first game. Or each turn, have an opportunity to kind of look through the cards and then shuffle them all up. Because there's a lot of stuff that can take place here that can throw a huge, massive wrench into somebody's game plan that they've put together and invested actions into. And that could probably lead to some negative feelings about the game. Also, do want to point out that if you are not into games where you're reacting to a lot of things going on, this might not be your bag of tricks. This reminds me a little bit in some ways of some of the more complex States of Siege games that came out from Victory Point Games, kind of along the lines of like Steve Carey's We Must Tell the Emperor and Malta, that Scorpion of the Sea, where you have to react to a lot of things, that there's a lot of things going on, and the reality is you're never going to have enough actions to take care of everything you want to get done. So it reminded me a little bit of that as well. I think this really will shine as a solitaire game. Either you play it hot seat or use the bot. I would probably recommend use the bot. I'm not great at, disassociating myself from each side in a hot seat situation. But I think a lot of people will really, really dig 2 Minutes to Midnight as a solitaire game. If you really enjoy Cold War games and find maybe Twilight Struggle is a little too abstract for you, that you want to get a little deeper into the mud with the Cold War, then this is certainly something that I would recommend checking out as well. If you find Twilight Struggle to be a bit complex, I would say probably shy away from 2 Minutes to Midnight, because it is a more complex game, in my opinion, than Twilight Struggle. But Twilight Struggle is not a very difficult game, so very few people find that to be an extremely difficult game to wrap their head around. All in all, I certainly do recommend you take a peek at this Kickstarter. You've got about 10 days left to check it out. All right, that is it for this time out. This video is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm surprised I still have a voice. Anyway, if you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it will also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, returns. It's coming back soon, where I share the latest in tabletop gaming news and first looks at new games on the horizon Monday through Thursday nights. All right, once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I hope you enjoy a lot of great gaming with your gang. Oh, you're still here. Well, while you're kicking it, how about subscribing to the Gaming Gang channel? Or seeing the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch? Or finding out what YouTube recommends you check out here at my channel? And of course, don't forget, get your geek on at thegaminggang.com.